As we know, in the original Avatar: The Last Airbender series, without an Avatar around, the Fire Nation was let free to roam the world and unleash the full scale of their destructive power, not hesitating to literally wipe out entire nations from the face of the earth. The catalyst that stopped this all-out war was, of course, the return of Avatar Aang. But have you ever wondered what would happen if Aang was unfrozen a year later? I mean, think about it. The Fire Nation was waiting for the return of Sozin's comet during the summer in order to end the war once and for all. If Aang kept sleeping in that iceberg for another whole year, would he be able to reverse the effects of what the Fire Nation would do in his absence, or not? Would the events of the air nomads vanishing from the face of the earth happen once again with the other nations as well? If not, why? Well, get ready, because we'll answer all of these burning questions in a bit. So first things first, let's take things in order. You see, as we explained in the original story, Aang was unfrozen and had a full year before the Fire Nation executed their full plans of using Sozin's comet to end the war. In that year, Aang had to master all 4 elements and fight the Fire Lord before the Fire Nation could destroy the whole world. In this version of the story, however, Aang is unfrozen only after Sozin's comet has already arrived. The results of that? Catastrophic. Ozai uses the comet to absolutely destroy the remaining nations standing in his way. I mean, remember, during Sozin's comet, the Firebenders are said to each, quote, hold the power of 100 suns. That's how much stronger they really become. So this kind of power, and with no Avatar standing in their way, the Fire Nation absolutely obliterates anyone in their way. So, will Aang be able to reverse the damage once he is unfrozen? Let's find out. But before that, we should probably explain the many crucial changes that would occur in the world even before Sozin's comet arrived. After all, many important things occurred that Aang will not be able to prevent in this version of the story. First of all, in episode 1, Aang is unfrozen and a huge light emits from his location through the sky, which attracts the attention of the Fire Nation's Prince Zuko that intends to capture him. What happens here? Nothing. Prince Zuko spends a few months in the frozen Southern Water Tribe until he decides to start looking somewhere else. The two of them do not meet in the Southern Water Tribe in this version of the story. Zuko is still searching for the Avatar and will keep doing so for as long as he has to in order to regain his honor, but he continues searching in another location. After all, the Avatar does not seem to be in the Southern Water Tribe. What this means is that Zuko does not find the village of Katara and Sokka either. After all, the reason Zuko went into the trouble of visiting this little village was because he saw Aang headed that way. Here, we'll skip through a few episodes from Book 1 and land all the way to the Season 1 finale, where Commander Zhao is in charge of the invasion in the Northern Water Tribe. If you recall, Zhao found a book in the library of Wan Shi Tong that explained the secret location of the Moon Spirit and its connection with the ability of the Waterbenders to control water. In doing so, Zhao finds the 2 koi fish in the Spirit Oasis and kills the Moon Spirit. When Zhao kills the Moon Spirit, all Waterbenders' powers are eradicated from the world. Water tribes fall fast, and the Fire Nation now has complete control over all Water tribes' territory. Here, someone could argue that Princess Yue can sacrifice her life in order to restore the moon, but in reality, after the Fire Nation has reached this far, Zhao could just come back and kill the Moon Spirit once more, even if that were to happen. So Yue does not do that in this version of the story, as it would be literally pointless. Instead, she waits for the right moment to be useful. What is that moment? You'll see in a bit. But before that, let's quickly remember the events that took place during the episode Nightmares and Daydreams. And yeah, I'm talking about the original timeline now. Why do I mention this episode? Because while making this video, I realized something incredibly important. You see, as you can remember, in this episode, Aang is going through various nightmares due to his upcoming encounter with Fire Lord Ozai, and as a result, Aang cannot fall asleep. Like, everyone around him try everything possible to help Aang. Acupuncture, massage, special pillows, nothing seems to work. Well, truth be told, some nights do be like that. Even for me, sleep just does not seem to come. The solution I found? Buy an anti-sleep mask from Manta Sleep. And let me tell you, sleep has never been the same for me. Adjustable, easy to use, comfortable. These masks literally tick all the boxes for a better sleep. And if you hop on the mid-year sale event, you can get these sleep masks while enjoying great discounts as well. Check Manta Sleep by clicking the link in the description down below and use code DOMAIN to get 10% off your order. So what are you waiting for? Improve your sleep by buying sleep masks from Manta Sleep today. Now, let's get back to our video. Moving on, as we'll explain in a bit, the death of the Moon Spirit and the eradication of waterbending from the world has not only catastrophic events for waterbenders, but it also throws the entire world out of balance. After all, Zhao killing one of the most ancient spirits, the moon, will surely not go unnoticed or unpunished by the rest of the spirits. Here, we should point out a very important detail. In Legend of Korra, we see that spirits and humans can move from the spirit world to the physical world and vice versa through a portal. Here, there's no such portal, right? After all, the one who opened this portal was Avatar Korra a few decades later. So how will spirits arrive in the human world? Even though that it is true that the opening of the portal made it incredibly easier for everyone to pass through the 2 worlds, it's also true that the portal is not the only way for someone to travel from one world to the other. After all, we did see many spirits throughout the series that could come and go in the physical and spirit world. The list includes, but is not limited to, General Old Iroh that made his appearance in the comics, Heibai that was seen infuriated from the destruction of the forest he was living in, Mother of Faces that also appeared in the comics, the Painted Lady, Wan Shi Tong, and even the Ocean and Moon Spirits. Before we move on, we should probably explain what happens with Prince Zuko and General Iroh. You see, as we saw in the original story, Zuko was never truly evil like his father. In reality, he took after his mother's side. Zuko was actually a kind and soft kid that just so happened to be raised by his psychopath father, Fire Lord Ozai. As a matter of fact, Zuko was never evil. Yeah, he did some unspeakable things, but in reality, Zuko was just confused. On one hand, he strived to regain his honor, but his inner self always knew that what he was doing was wrong. That's the reason why, even after being accepted back into the Fire Nation as a glorified prince, he never felt right, and he always seemed to carry a burden in his heart. In this version of the story, Zuko is again no different, with or without Aang present. His uncle is still with him and continues guiding him to the right direction. You better believe that Zuko does not turn good all that easily. Quite the opposite, actually. Zuko goes through hardships and challenges until he finally discovers what he truly needs to do. You see, after Commander Zhao announces his intent to kill the moon, General Iroh turns against him and tries to fight him off. Zuko is left in the middle, not knowing what he needs to do. Just like it happened in the original story, in the episode Crossroads of Destiny, Zuko is now tasked to make a choice: betray his nation that is arguably oppressing people and is about to destroy the whole world, or betray his uncle that showed him nothing but love and wisdom for as long as he knew him. Zuko chooses wrong and sides with the Fire Nation. He betrays his uncle and helps Commander Zhao to capture him. After this triumph of the Fire Nation, Ozai learns of his son's accomplishments and decides to call him back in order to restore him as a rightful prince of the Fire Nation. Yeah, Zuko might not have found the Avatar, but helping the Fire Nation eradicate waterbending from the world? Yeah, Zuko more than enough showed his devotion to the Fire Nation. In essence, when Ozai exiled his son to find the Avatar, he probably never thought that his son could ever find the Avatar. The sole reason he banished his son and told him that the only way to restore his honor was to find the Avatar was because he wanted to punish him. Ozai never expected Zuko to find the Avatar. I mean, what are the chances, right? The Avatar was gone for over 100 years. What's the chance that his son is actually going to find him? But now that Zuko showed his worth, he calls him back as the nation's prince and restores his honor. Iroh, on the other hand, is disgraced as a traitor and is thrown in a prison cell to rot, just like it happened in the original story. The only difference, however, is that this happened a few months earlier. Zuko keeps struggling, but the trigger that changes him completely does not happen yet. During the solar eclipse, Iroh escapes his prison like it happened in the original story. What happens with Zuko next? Well, we'll have to speak about some other events a bit, and we'll get back to Zuko soon. Okay, so now let's fast forward the events a bit. Sozin's comet has already arrived, and the firebenders become incredibly more powerful. Just for reference, we saw that certain skilled firebenders became a one-man army while fighting under Sozin's comet. Zhang, for example, was seen literally flying and even destroying an entire group of tanks on his own. Ozai was seen destroying entire regions of land from tens of meters high in the sky by unleashing his firebending from above. This power boost the Fire Nation enjoys is too much for anyone to stand in their way. Added to the fact that their only resistance is now earthbenders, oh, this task is a piece of cake for them. Ozai uses Sozin's comet to end the war. He kills tens of thousands of people and brings all benders to the brink of extinction. The fact that in the original story the Fire Nation kept benders as prisoners during the war shows that Ozai probably had a use for them. After all, he did not kill the prisoners he took, but rather kept them alive in various prisons throughout the world. He seemed to have some kind of plan for them, right? But if that's the case, then why did the Fire Nation completely annihilate the entire Air Nation? You see, unlike the case of Aang and the Air Nomads, keeping some benders as prisoners is no serious threat now that the Fire Nation has complete control over everyone and every region in the world. In the case of Aang, however, in the original story, Aang, aka the Avatar of this generation, has already been born and is already a teenager, meaning that if he were to reach his full potential, this Avatar would indeed be a serious threat to the Fire Lord. Just the Avatar state alone is enough to threaten an entire nation like the Fire Nation. You see, as Roku pointed out when teaching this to Aang, the Avatar state is a defense mechanism designed to empower the Avatar with the skills and knowledge of all their past lives. The glow in the eyes and potentially the tattoos in the case of the Air Nomad is the combination of all the Avatar's past lives, focusing their energy through the Avatar's body in order to give the said Avatar an enormous power boost. As a result of this fearsome potential that the Avatar possesses, Fire Lord Azula decided to completely annihilate all airbenders so as not to take any chances that the upcoming Avatar will get in the way of him and his plans. But back to Ozai. After the Fire Nation defeats all the nations of the world and makes the entire world just a big Fire Nation colony, as we explained, Ozai takes all remaining benders and keeps them for his next projects. What will these projects be? Well, as we know, benders can do all sorts of things. Earthbenders especially can help a ton when building infrastructure, or maybe even help in the industrial sector through their bending. In reality, again, the only benders remaining other than the firebenders are earthbenders in this version of the story. Airbenders are seemingly all killed. Waterbenders can no longer bend due to the death of the moon spirit, leaving just the earthbenders behind. When it comes to the colonies, bending of any sort other than firebending is strictly prohibited. The only exemption is made for when earthbenders are working under the Fire Nation. Because of that, a rule is established. Anyone earthbending in the Fire Nation colonies, which now includes the entire world, is thrown into prison and later becomes a tool for the Fire Nation to use in whatever they need help with. Yeah, I know this was a long introduction, but in reality, the exciting part is just now getting started. Why? Because Aang is now unfrozen. In reality, the way he was unfrozen in the original story was due to Katara getting mad at Sokka and accidentally waterbending an iceberg, thus helping Aang's iceberg emerge to the surface. Since Katara cannot waterbend in this version of the story, as after all, in this video, we're assuming that this event is now taking place a whole year after what the time Aang was unfrozen in the original story. Everything we just analyzed happened, and those waterbenders can no longer use their powers due to the death of the moon spirit. And yeah, obviously this includes Katara as well. So how will Aang get unfrozen in this version of the story? Well, for the sake of the video, let's just assume that he does. This might happen through a weather phenomenon, or, well, it just so happened that this iceberg emerges to the surface. So what next? Aang finds his way to the nearest village, Sokka's and Katara's village. This little village is not under Fire Nation colonies for the simple reason that it held no importance to the Fire Nation. What good would a pile of igloos and ice do to them? Especially considering that only a few people live there anyway, and none of them was even a bender to begin with. So, back to Aang meeting Katara and Sokka. The two siblings explain to Aang what happened with the war. You better believe that Aang is shocked. If he was devastated in the original story, now his mental state does not even compare to how it was in the canon timeline. Unlike the original story, Zuko was not present in the village to see the huge glow from Aang's resurfacing, meaning that Aang just leaves the village without telling anyone that he's actually the Avatar. I mean, remember, in the original story, Aang planned on doing just that, leaving without revealing to anyone that he was the Avatar. This changed only after Zuko appeared and changed his plans. Aang had to reveal his identity to save the village. Now that he's not forced to do that, he simply leaves the village, and the young Avatar probably never meets the two siblings ever again. Of course, this has chain reactions in all events of the series, with probably the most important ones being that Tenzin and his siblings are never born in this version of the story, as Aang probably does not end up with Katara. Or does he now? Well, we'll explain in a bit what happens next. So Aang now sets off on his own for the Southern Air Temple in order to try and find any remaining survivors. But just like it happened in the original story, Aang stumbles upon the corpse of Monk Gyatso. This triggers the Avatar state, and the whole world is now alerted that the Avatar has returned, similar to what happened in the normal timeline. This includes Prince Zuko as well. This is the final stimulation that Zuko needed to turn good after seeing that the Avatar has returned. Strangely enough, he feels hope in his heart, that being that he hopes that the Avatar can defeat the Fire Nation. Zuko goes through a very difficult period thinking about what he needs to do, until he decides to betray the Fire Nation and join the Avatar in order to help him free the world from the Fire Nation. But before that, he needs to find his uncle. In the meantime, after cooling off from his encounter with Monk Gyatso's dead body, Aang sets out on his journey to master all elements on his own without any help. Unlike the original story, on the other hand, Aang now does not have to master all the elements within just a few months. He definitely tries as hard as he can to master the elements as fast as possible in order to face the Fire Lord and thus restore the balance to the world, but this can take a little longer than just a few months, like it happened in the original story. After all, Sozin's comet is now gone. Damage has already been done. When it comes to the four elements, Aang now needs to master earth, water, and fire. But is waterbending possible in this version of the story? After all, the moon spirit is now dead. The answer to that question is actually yes, technically. You see, in the original story, Aang seemed to be unaffected by the death of the moon while in the Avatar state. After all, by combining his abilities with the ocean spirit, they obliterated an entire Fire Nation invasion using just waterbending. Now, whether this applies only when Aang is in the Avatar state, or he's generally unaffected due to his Avatar powers, is up for debate. But nonetheless, Aang needs to proceed and try and find a master for both earthbending and firebending. For firebending, this teacher will be Zhang. Without Katara by Aang's side, he never burns her, and he never decides to not firebend again. He spends some time with his new master, and after some time, he becomes an excellent firebender. This does not only help Aang become stronger, but it's also a great cover for him, as anyone who doubts who he is can see he's just firebending in order to show that he's actually from the Fire Nation. Aang's second element in this version of the story is fire. But how about earthbending now? You see, the options for his teachers here are two: King Bumi or Toph. Bumi, however, is imprisoned and heavily guarded. After all, it is known that King Bumi is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful earthbender in the world, thus making Aang reaching Bumi impossible. So what happens with Toph then? You see, his Avatar instincts show Aang that he needs to find Toph, similarly to what happened in the original story. But is Toph free, or is she imprisoned? After all, she is an earthbender, right? The answer to that is yes, she is free. After all, what the Fire Nation sees is just a little helpless blind girl. Who would have thought that this girl is actually the one of the strongest earthbenders that ever lived? Aang goes undercover and manages to find Toph. After a series of events, he convinces Toph to help him earthbend, and thus he comes with him as his teacher. 3 elements down, 1 more to go, and this is by far the most challenging: water. After all, there's no remaining waterbenders to teach Aang. What Aang does instead is that he trains with Guru Patik in order to master his Avatar state and activate it on will, rather than learning to waterbend naturally. But will this truly be enough? Well, before that, an even more important plot development is the following. As we previously explained, Fire Nation, and more specifically Zhao, killed the moon spirit. Well, you better believe that balance in the world is definitely thrown off. So what happens now? We still did not explain how the rest of the spirits react to the death of one of the most ancient spirits that lived peacefully without bothering anyone in the physical world. Hear this: evil spirits start roaming the physical world seeking revenge. revenge. And because of that, we now have two timelines, all depending on how the spirits behave in the physical world. In the first case, the spirits fight against both Fire Nation and the Avatar alike. They simply attack humans on sight. If that happens, the world becomes a living hell. Everywhere becomes a battlefield. And at this point, no one can stop it. Aang either dies shortly after this in his efforts to stop the endless war, or he simply dies a few years later without being able to stop this conflict from continuing to happen. Imagine the Fire Nation fighting against multiple powerful spirits. The Earthbenders trying to organize a coup and fight back now that the Fire Nation is occupied with another threat. The spirits indiscriminately attacking any human they see. Firebender, Earthbender, non-bender, and even the Avatar. This conflict is as brutal and as complicated as it gets. Aang is unfortunately powerless against this madness, and he dies shortly after without being able to stop it. When Aang dies, well, truth be told, we're not sure what happens next. You see, since waterbenders no longer exist, does this mean that the Avatar cycle is now broken? Or is the next Avatar born among the would-be waterbenders if the ocean spirit was still alive? Either way, the results stay the same. No Avatar can stop this all-out war. The world is now beyond repair. A truly catastrophic end result. Because of that, it would really be pointless to discuss what changes would occur in future Avatar generations like Legend of Korra, as again, the world is nowhere near to what we saw in the Avatar franchise. A true catastrophe, as simple as that. But how about the second case scenario? Is it any better? You see, here we assume that the spirits seeking revenge fight alongside Aang against the Fire Nation. They see Aang as being on their side, and thus help him to restore the balance to the world. I mean, remember, as we know, the Avatar is the bridge between humans and spirits, so it's not far-fetched to believe that some spirits could side with Aang in fighting the Fire Nation. While the spirits help Aang fight the Fire Nation and restore balance, Aang somehow learns about Yue and how she can help the ocean spirit come back to life by sacrificing herself. This information comes from either a spirit that is willing to help Aang or from Yue herself. After that, Aang, with the help of the spirits, tries to liberate the Northern Water Tribe from the Fire Nation. When he does, Yue now decides that it's time to sacrifice herself in order to bring back to life the Moon Spirit. With the Moon Spirit returning back to life, the waterbenders regain their powers. And you better believe that the Fire Nation is not ready for what's about to come. We now have the entirety of the Water Tribe, the Avatar, spirits, and potentially even Earthbenders joining the war against the Fire Nation. Team Avatar defeats the Fire Nation and forces them to abolish the colonies and end the war. During the war, Zuko also fights the Avatar. He introduces himself as the Fire Lord's son, and when Aang gets defensive, Zuko explains that he also wants Team Avatar to defeat his father and restore balance to the world. While all these we previously explained were taking place, Zuko managed to find his uncle, beg for his forgiveness, and after that, trained with him. He told his uncle about his plan to overthrow his father and potentially even fight his sister. Because of that, Iroh teaches lightning redirection to his nephew in this version of the story as well. When Zuko joined Team Avatar, he passed this knowledge to Aang as well, so that if Aang had to fight Ozai, he could redirect his lightning attacks. When Team Avatar wins the war and liberates all occupied territories, Zuko challenges his sister to an Agni Kai. Zuko chooses the honorable method to become the Fire Lord, without Azula attacking Katara. Her lightning attack is aimed at Zuko. When this happens, Zuko redirects this attack back at Azula. Because of that, manages to defeat her. Zuko is now the Fire Lord, and both Azula and Ozai are thrown into prison. So, what happens in the next Avatar generations? Who will Aang marry? Will it be Toph? Or will fate bring Aang and Katara together? Well, truth be told, we leave this part for you to decide. What do you think happens? Does Aang end up with Toph, Katara, or someone else? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. But no matter what, Aang dies of old age like it happened in the original timeline. And after that, the next Avatar in line is Korra. Depending on who Aang marries, Korra's mentors might or might not be different. And generally, the events taking place in Legend of Korra might or might not be different as well. But since you made it all the way until the end of the video, check out this one as well, where we explain all 12 known avatars in the Avatar franchise, including past, present, and even future avatars like Genji. Go on, click it!